For those who are already students here, faculty and staff, welcome back to Burke Auditorium. And for those who are not from here, welcome to Kroon Hall. We're very honored and happy to have you all here as we open up this, our Black History Month celebration. What I'd like to do is give you a little history of Black History Month, but first I'll introduce myself. I am Thomas Rashad Easley, Assistant Dean of Community and Inclusion. I co-lead the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee with Yolanda Kinonia Yoli, okay, over there, all right, okay, so that's my partner in good doing. And then we work with an amazing group of faculty, staff, but I have to highlight the students, okay, on this committee. Before we get into that, let me get into a little bit of the history. Black History Month is an annual celebration of achievements by African Americans and a time for recognizing the central role of blacks in U.S. history. It's also known as African American History Month. Now, this event grew out of Negro History Month, which is the brainchild noted by historian Carter G. Woodson. And if you've read anything by him, The Miseducation of a Negro, then you know that Carter G. Woodson knew a whole lot more than what most people know in 2020. And because he was a visionary. And he was among other prominent African Americans. It wasn't just him. And while this started in 1915, and here we are in 2020 celebrating this, and we have an amazing scholar here with us who's going to explain so much more to you, I want to encourage you to do something. So we're in the shortest month of the year, and they call this Black History Month, right? I want to encourage you to remember no one should determine when you celebrate your own history or Black history or any other history. I don't need the month of February to celebrate Black history. I can just do it. And I don't need the month of any other month to do that. So what I want to encourage you all to do is to remember that don't wait for someone to tell you when to celebrate and how to celebrate. And also don't wait for someone to invite you in to celebrate with them. Everyone is welcome. This is not Black history. This is American history. This is U.S. history. This is world history. Okay, and we're all a part of this planet. And so with that, I'm not going to say any more because I got my poetic snaps in the room. Thank you. And I'm not going to belabor this, but I just want to say thank you all for being here. Also, I bring greetings from Dean Indy Burke. And I hope that you all will have a good time and have a good program. So now I'm going to introduce someone that I'm very proud of. Okay, and this is Deja Curtis. It's one of our students, one of our scholars. And that's it, student, scholar. Originally from Tampa, Florida. She's a first-year student. And she's also on EQUID. EQUID stands for Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity. And Deja has taken the helm of leading a number of events this month. And so I would just like to ask my leader to come up and please introduce the person of the hour. Deja Curtis, please.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's great to see so many familiar faces here. And also for those that I don't know, thank you for joining us in this celebration. When I first began to conceptualize this event back in September, the first person that came to mind was Dr. John Francis. The discovery of environmental leaders like Dr. Francis helped me to see myself in this movement, and it is an absolute honor to have him as our first guest speaker. Dr. Francis is an environmental activist and National Geographic Education Fellow. He was galvanized to give up using motorized vehicles after witnessing the 1971 oil spill in San Francisco Bay. Confronted with judgment following his decision, he shortly after took a vow of silence that ended up lasting 17 years. His decision to walk lasted 22. In that time, Dr. Francis earned up to his doctorate degree in land resources and walked across the United States. Since then, Dr. Francis' breadth of experience has included working with the United States Coast Guard on oil spill regulation, serving as United Nations Environment Program Goodwill Ambassador, teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and authoring 2 books. Currently, he is West Cape May Commissioner and is running for Congress. To me, his environmental activism exemplifies the power that each and every one of us has to make a change in ourselves and even the ones around us. So please, without further ado, assist me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Francis. Before he speaks, we'll play a short 6-minute video and then he'll talk.
Time again, and you can be sure that there will be many It's graduation time again, and you can be sure that there will be many speeches urging young people to go out there and change the world. And those same young people will be wondering how. Well, tonight we have the story of one man who set about changing the world by first changing himself. Our story begins on a misty night in 1971 when two oil tankers collide beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, spilling more than 500,000 gallons of crude into the bay. At that time, John Francis was just another hippie living in West Marin County. But when he saw the oozing sludge and dying birds, he wanted to protest in a way that others thought was crazy. Francis wanted to stop riding in cars.
And I found myself on the road walking, and I said, well, I'm already walking here. I'm just going to keep walking.
With his banjo as his companion, John Francis challenged anyone who would listen to believe in his mission.
I found myself arguing with my friends if one person could make a difference by not riding in an automobile.
So he had another idea. To stop the arguments, he would simply stop talking.
I decided that I would stop speaking just for one day to give my community a gift of my silence, because John was a big talker.
This is Francis back then. He was 27 years old on the day he stopped talking in order to truly listen. That day's silence lasted 17 years.
When I first stopped speaking, I could hear all the conversations pretty much that I ever had. After about a month of not speaking, they soon went away.
Without the conversations, John had only to listen to himself, and what he heard disturbed him. He realized that he had been living a lie about who he was as a black man in a white world.
What I saw in the media was I could be a buffoon, or I could be a criminal, but could I be the person I am right now? And I didn't see that person. It took me to just stop talking until I said, oh my God, there you are. and then I just rediscovered who I was, and I didn't need to lie anymore. Well, I couldn't lie because I didn't talk. I mean, I just couldn't do it.
Francis went from being this know-it-all to someone who wanted to know more. So he began a pilgrimage that left his footprints across the country.
John Francis. Linda Lindell.
You got to take a ride and you walked all the way out.
I saw America. I heard America speak to me. And I was very taken by what my experience was.
What Francis didn't know at that time was that he was ahead of his time, on the forefront of what would become a movement, environmentalism. When he found that Southern Oregon University offered a new course in environmental studies, he walked to Ashland and enrolled. He then walked to Missoula, Montana to get a master's degree, eventually ending up at the University of Wisconsin to get his PhD. Along the way, he also taught a discussion class. Remember, all without speaking.
Sometimes I would make these signs like so. My class would sit around, they go, what's he saying? What's he saying? I don't know, I think he's talking about clear cutting. No, that's not clear cutting. He was using a handsaw, and he wouldn't clear cut with you can clear cut with a handsaw. I think he's talking about selective forestry. And I would just kind of back out, because this is a discussion class, and let the discussion go on.
And Francis's education was evolving as well.
I thought environment was about human-made ugliness and pollution and endangered species. I started to realize that environment was really much more than that. That it involved, human rights and civil rights and economic equity and how we treat each other when we meet each other. All
all along his journey from west coast to east, the man who walked and didn't talk was being heard. In the 22 years he spent trekking across America, the once counterculture concept of environmentalism had become mainstream. By the time he arrived in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Coast Guard invited him to write pollution regulations for the nation's waterways, and the United Nations appointed him environmental ambassador.
I couldn't have dreamed that up. I couldn't have seen it. When people said, one person can't make a difference, I have to say there were doubts sometimes, as I'm walking and I am alone, and I am just a black man with a banjo walking across America. I think we just make that commitment to make the journey. And once we commit ourselves to doing it, we change. We change ourselves from just sitting on the fence thinking about it to actually jumping in the field and making a mad dash or a slow walk. And I think that's our journey. That's all of our journeys. I think each one of us has that journey, that potential in ourselves to do that.
John Francis just published a book called Planetwalker and is getting ready for another walk across the United States.
Please welcome to the stage Dr. John Francis.
Wow. Well, thank you for being here, and it is my honor. Thank you, Deja, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm so happy to be here. And it's taken so long and so many steps to be here. I mean, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't made that walk across the United States, the length of South America, if I hadn't shut up for 17 years to listen, to learn from all of us, because we all have something to say. Now, when I first started talking, and I love saying this story, I love to think about my mother, and she's gone now, but I remember in Washington, D.C., I started speaking on the 20th anniversary of Earth Day. And I wanted to speak on Earth Day because things had changed for me. And you know, you saw that on the video. I thought that after seeing an oil spill, everything was really about pollution. And there are a couple of things that come from that. One was that seeing the oil spill and seeing that birds were dying, the animals were dying, and that, you know, people were crying, they were trying to clean up the oil from the beach. There was physical and emotional pain for me that really made me say I had to do something. I had to do something. I had to think about what it was I was going to do, because it hurt me to see the pollution. It hurt me to see that oil washing up on the shore. I'll get right back to that, but the first words I said after 17 years of not speaking, my mom. Now I was going to tell you about my mom. She hadn't heard me speak for 17 years. And so when I first said, thank you for being here in Washington, D.C. on the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, she jumped up out of her chair and she said, hallelujah, Johnny's talking. I can imagine for 17 years I hadn't spoken to my mom. And what she would say, if I did start speaking, I said, wow, that's really impressive. So she jumped out of her chair. And my dad, though, he was kind of different. After 17 years of not speaking, he just looked at me and he said, that's one. And he said that's one because he always wanted me to speak and ride in cars. And I'll tell you that story too as we go along. But he just said that's one. Now me, I hadn't heard my voice in so long that I didn't recognize it. And so I was standing there and I kept looking around behind me to see who was saying what I was thinking. And then I realized it was me. And I thought that was so funny that I didn't recognize my own voice that I started laughing. I said, oh, my dad said, yeah, he really is crazy. Look at him. Well, back in California, you know, I did give up riding in cars, and my friends and my neighbors, they thought that was pretty silly. And they said, you know, one person can't make a difference. I say that to you, and you know, nod your head because you know that that's not true. One person can make a difference. We all can make a difference. And together, we can make a really big difference. So I was tired of the arguing, the back and forth and everything, and so I decided on my 27th birthday that I was going to be quiet for one day. I didn't start out that I was going to not speak for 17 years, so I'm sure I probably wouldn't have done it. But that one day, I was like, I could do a day. And that's going to be, I've been reading The Hobbit. I don't know how many people here have read The Hobbit. Yeah, well, you know, hobbits on birthdays, they give big birthday parties and they give gifts. They don't get gifts. And I thought, wow, that was really cool. Tolkien really had it there. I said, that's a great idea. I'm going to give the gift of my silence to my community because I talk so much, you know. I could talk and I could, you know, people just said, John, you're not speaking on your birthday. Thank you, Lord. And so I didn't speak on that birthday, but it was really important for me because that's when I realized that I had stopped learning. Because I would listen just enough to someone to think that I knew what they were going to say. If it didn't match what I already knew, if it didn't match what I already believed, I stopped listening. And I started thinking what I'm going to say back to them when they finish to show them that I have the right answer. They were wrong. And even if it was what I believed, I could say it better. So what this told me was, John, if you don't listen, if you're not able to hear anything that's new, that's different, that maybe is on the edge of what you believe, you're going to not learn anything. And so I said, I better do this another day. And then another day went by, and then a week, and people started asking me, John, what's going on? And I would say, oh, it's your birthday. Well, that worked for a couple of days. But a week later, a month later, that was not what was going on. People just didn't want to hear it's your birthday. They started talking. You know, John's not talking. Yeah, well, he started walking before, but now he's not talking. When I told my parents, I called them up and I said, Mom, Dad, guess what? I've given up riding in cars. The oil. This is a big spill out here. They're back in Philadelphia. Yeah, a big oil spill. And so, the environment, Mom. Environment hadn't reached Philadelphia yet. Well, I don't ride in any cars. My dad wants to know why I didn't do this when I was 16. I didn't know about the environment then, Dad. Well, that worked okay. You know, my mom said, you know, if you're really happy, you don't have to call me and tell me that you're happy walking around and everything. It's the letter that I wrote them to tell them that, you know, as airmail, we didn't have email back then yet, and to tell them that I had stopped talking and that I probably couldn't call them up anymore and that I couldn't drive out there to see them. And so my mom wrote me back and she said, your dad is on the next plane, buddy, because he thought I had been taken over by some strange California religious cult. What could that be? Yeah. So my dad did come out and he found me walking, and you know, he called my mom up and said, well, you know, yeah, he is walking. He's trying to learn how to play a banjo. Oh, no. People seem to like him. There's nothing I can do. I mean, he's not drinking. He doesn't smoke anything. No. This wouldn't work back in Philadelphia, I don't think. You know. We just have to leave him out here, you know. And so they made me promise to write letters home to let them know that I was okay, which I did. And I just started walking and learning to play the banjo, painting and writing, keeping a journal. And the journal and all that walking and music are all in a book that I published called Planetwalker, if you can find that somewhere. And I walked up into the wilderness. I spent a lot of time in the wilderness areas, the Kamyopsis Wilderness in Oregon. And I think I learned a lot about just listening to nature and being in nature. And I have to say that it was healing. Nature is healing. There were a lot of things going on in my head. When I stopped talking, there were like conversations that were just going blah, 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 blah. And then you said this, and I said that. And, blah. And I was like going, how can I turn that off? How can I turn all that chatter off? Well, after not speaking for a few months, it all went away. All the dangling conversations and things all went away. And not because I had done some great, amazing thing. I mean, I just didn't have those conversations anymore. It was all I was listening and learning, and I was learning so much about myself, so much about each other, and I said, I'm going to do this for another year. So every year came by, it was like, I'm going to vow to not speak for another year and to listen. And so I listened. And what I heard convinced me that I needed to walk across the country, not just across the country, but around the world, because I needed to learn from a lot of people. And so I finished my undergraduate in Oregon with this long-term goal to walk and sail around the planet as part of my education in the spirit and hope that I could benefit all of us. But I didn't know what that meant. I mean, it sounded good. And so I graduated from my undergraduate school, and my dad came out. He was so proud. He said, look, your mom and I are really proud that you can go to school and not talk and graduate. How do you do that? And I hunched my shoulders and grabbed my banjo, picked up my backpack. He says, you're not going to drive. He says, you have a bachelor's degree. That's wonderful. We're proud of you. But what are you going to do with a bachelor's degree if you don't ride in cars and talk? You need to ride in cars and talk. That's the one that he was, he wanted the two, that I was going to ride in cars. I was talking now for him. Well, I walked all the way up to Montana through Washington, Oregon, Washington, and Port Townsend, Washington. And did anyone know where Port Townsend, Washington is? Olympic Peninsula. And there I built a boat, a rowboat, and I rowed it across Puget Sound. Get out of here, man. Yeah, I rowed it across Puget Sound. I remember I had to ask Kit Africa, who is another boat builder up there, how do I get across Puget Sound like rowing them? He told me. I didn't ask him. I just pointed that way. He goes, well, you have to row. The time the current was coming, the tide was coming in. You got to row like you're not going there, and you will get there. So I got there. And once I got there, I sold the boat on that side. And then I walked across the state of Washington to Idaho to Montana. And I love to tell the story about Montana because I went to the university there. I had applied 2 years before to the university. They asked me, well, when was I going to get there? And I wrote back, I'll be there in 2 years, walking. Well, I got there in 2 years, and they said to me, well, John, you're here. This is the last day for you to register for school. Are you ready to register for school? And I went, and you got to remember this sign. I know you know what that means, right? Okay. What, you don't have any money? That's all right. Come back tomorrow and we'll take care of it. Now, I'm back the next day at 6 o'clock in the morning waiting on the steps of Jeanette Rankin Hall, waiting for them to take care of it. I want to see what that's going to look like. The director came up and he gave me, John, here is $150. You can register for 1 credit. Okay, I'm going to register for 1 credit. Reading and conferencing. So you register for that. We can give you a key because you're a graduate student to the office. You can use the library and we'll figure out the rest. What they figured out was that I could attend all the classes I needed to. They talked to all the professors, and the professor said, okay, we'll save his grade. We won't actually register him in our class. We'll just let him come. We'll take all the exams, and we'll save his grade. And when we figure out how to get the rest of the money, then he can register for this class, and we'll give him the grade. Financial aid? Whoa, this was way beyond financial aid. I didn't understand how they did that, but they did, and that's kindness. That was some kind of kindness, and I want you to remember kindness because kindness is a big part of me being here today and getting across the country and having a smile on my face still. So my dad comes out again because I'm graduating from the University of Montana with a master's degree, and my dad, and I know you know what he says. Son, we are really proud of you. Don't think we're not proud of you. Your mother and I are very proud, but how are you going to do anything with a master's degree if you don't ride in cars and talk? I grab my banjo, I get my backpack, and I hunch my shoulders, and I'll keep walking east. The next place I get to is South Dakota. And in South Dakota, I said, wow, I'm going to be a printer. I get a job. You got to work. I get a job as a printer because I'm printing out a newsletter. And the reason why I wanted to print this newsletter is because I remember reading that Gandhi believed that if you had if you were like had a newspaper or a journal or a magazine. He believed that writing like that, that journalism created community. And I wanted to create community, so I kept this newsletter called Planetwalker. That's also part of that book that I'm Planetwalker. So there I am, learning how to print and printing my newsletter out. It's great until I decided, maybe I will go to graduate school, because every time I finish school, I say, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to go to school again and not talk, because it's just so hard. It's just too hard. So there I am looking at the graduate schools on the way. The University of Wisconsin, that's one of them. Well, I write a bunch of them. But I'm in South Dakota, and I get a letter back from the University of Wisconsin saying, we would love to have you come and look at our school. It's the Nelson Institute now, but then it was just the Environmental Institute for Environmental Studies. We'd love to come to our school, and we could support you. We could support you. That's an important, working phrase there. We could support you. And my dad came out to visit me while I was in South Dakota. He comes and sees me all the time, and this time I'm having a powwow that one of my friends befriended me, who worked at the printing press with me. He was Sue, and he had his family come out to Watertown, South Dakota, and have a powwow. And it was an Indian school, Philandro Indian school. They came up, and they're from all the nations, Indian nations, and they danced and they did this powwow. And a holy man from Minnesota came down, Gary Holybill. He came down and he blessed my walk. And my dad was sitting there. He's like going, how do you do this? Because they were like, he says, you're one black man and you have all these Indians and white people dancing together. How did you do that? Because it's not, in Watertown, South Dakota, that was the first powwow ever held in Watertown, South Dakota. And of course, I didn't know. I was just getting ready to grab my backpack and my banjo and keep walking. I show my dad the letter. It says, we'd like to support you. And he says, looks like they're going to give you money. That's why I showed it to him, because if it had anything to do with money, my dad knew what it was. Because he's always asking me, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for this? How are you going to... So I grabbed my backpack, my banjo, and walk off to the University of Wisconsin, and I started studying. After a year of studying there, my dad comes out and he goes, this is really good, son. We're really proud of you. You haven't asked us for any money. And you're going to graduate school. But what are you going to do with a PhD if you don't ride in cars and talk? He says, yeah, but my sister said I should just leave you alone because you seem to be doing so much better when you're not saying anything, which was true. Well, I did finish my coursework and passed all my exams, and I continued walking east, and I got to the East Coast to Cape May, New Jersey, and that's where I am living now, in Cape May, New Jersey. So it took me 7 years and 1 day to walk across the United States. It was a wonderful walk, and I met a lot of people, and the people that my parents would be afraid that I was spending the night with. Like I'd be walking down the road and somebody would drive up in their truck and they had guns along the road. Oh, they said, hey boy, can you play that banjo? And I'd play the banjo for them, and they go, damn, you can play that banjo. We seen you walking across Wyoming about 3 months ago. You need a place to stay tonight? And we live just a few miles down here. There's a holler down there. You just go knock on our door, and I would do that. And like the movies where you go down the basement, the heroine goes down the basement. Don't go down the basement. The ghost is down there. They're going to get you. Oh, man. Well, I'd be knocking on the door, and I can see my parents going, no, don't knock on that door. Who you, those people? I open the door. God's opened the door for me. I look in. What's wrong with you, John? Oh, you ain't never seen that many guns on the wall, have you? Oh, come on in. They're not for you. Come on. I get in there. I get in. Next thing I know, they're on the phone. Yeah, you know that boy we seen playing the banjo? That's right, he's here. Yeah, right. No, he can't come to your house tonight. No, he's having dinner with us, and Billy Bob's taking him to school tomorrow for show and tell. That's right, that's right. So I have to tell you that I walked across red states, blue states, purple states, and all the colors in between, and all the people that I met helped me. All the people that I met took me in, supported me. And so I wouldn't be here if it were not for the kindness of everybody, the kindness of all of us. When I finally get to the East Coast and it's the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, I'm going to start talking. I know that because every year I decide another year. But on this birthday, I go, no, I'm going to be speaking. And I'm not speaking on my birthday. I want to speak on Earth Day because environment for me has changed. Environment for me has changed to be about how we treat each other, about kindness. Because what way we treat each other with our own interactions, with our personal interactions, is going to manifest in the physical environment around us. So if we oppress one another, if we exploit each other, we're going to have some really serious environmental problems, physical environmental problems. How do we deal with that? So for me, environment change from being not just about climate change and loss of species and habitat, but to be about human rights and civil rights and gender equality, economic equity, educational equity, all these ways that we relate together, all these ways that we're together here on the planet. And so I had to thank everybody for being here. I'm thanking you for being here because you're part of this journey. This is what I learned from all of you. I mean, I learned in my formal education that, you know, how to do analysis and of oil spills, and that's what I wrote on my dissertation. How do we look at oil spills and look at natural resource damage assessment? How do we do that? But I also learned from just the being on the road and the being with you and the being with other people, that people are part of the environment. So how we treat each other when we meet each other is so important. So we're on this journey together, and this journey is pretty amazing. I discovered it's pretty amazing because if someone had told me, John, listen, if you really want to make an impact on the planet, you've seen the oil spill, I know, and you're crying about it, but look, just get out of your car. Just get out of your car and start walking east. And I started walking east, and as I got a little further on, they said, yeah, and shut up too. And you're going to make a difference. You'll really make a difference. And along that part, they say, and shut up too. They should say, and listen. Shut up and listen and learn, and you'll make a difference. Well, I wouldn't have believed them. I wouldn't have believed them because it just seems so crazy. It seems so fanciful. But that's what happened. I mean, a few years later, there I am in Washington, D.C. 20 years later, I'm in Washington, D.C. writing oil pollution regulations for the United States. That's exactly what happened. So we don't actually see the end of our journey. We don't actually see it. But we have to make that commitment to really make a difference, and we'll be on that journey. I know all of you have made that commitment, else you wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be here. So I'm going to end what I have to say with music. This piece that I'm playing is called Life Celebration. Celebrate your life every day. Celebrate our life every day. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we have enough time for one or two questions. If anybody wants to raise their hand and ask anything. Also, thank you for that wonderful talk. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Just a quick comment. Bill Weber, we shared time together at Wisconsin in that PhD program.
You have to help me with that because I'm hearing challenged. So
You scribbling answers on your notes at Wisconsin when we were, sorry. We shared time together as PhD students at Wisconsin. You scribbling notes. I just wanted to say it's a great pleasure to finally hear your voice for the first time in person. Thank you.
You guys went to school together at Wisconsin, and he remembers when you would scribble on a piece of paper because you weren't speaking then.
Oh, and how did I communicate? Like with...
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, good. Thanks. Were you at Wisconsin?
Yes.
Gorillas.
Yeah. I didn't talk, did I? Yeah, it's really interesting because sometimes I see people who I didn't talk, they just know me from not talking, and I'm talking, and they're looking at me like something's wrong. You know, like, what's wrong with you? You're talking. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
John, thank you so much. I'm on this side.
John.
Good. Thank you so much for letting us walk with you a little bit today. I've had occasion, and many of us in this room have looked at the writings and the thoughts of Henry David Thoreau. And he talks about going to that cabin he built intentionally, a kind of, some would say a withdrawing from the world, but I'm not sure that that's what he was intending to do. So I just wanted to open that door of Thoreau, intentionality, and ask for your reflections upon an intentional environmental life.
Thank you, John. That was a good question. I read lots of Thoreau while I was not speaking, and when I lived in a little cabin in the wilderness areas, I did, Henry David was one of my teachers, I would say. And I think the intention is not necessarily to be anything, but to be and learn what it is that we are meant to be, and to be that. And I guess for me, the biggest thing was to learn how to be me, to be myself, and to find myself. Because I had lost myself in the race to be accepted and different. I mean, to be accepted and like everybody else, which I couldn't be. And finding who I was that was my, I guess that was my intention, and that's where I ended up, here. That's why I'm standing here. Thank you for that question, John.
Thank you for your talk. Did you ever answer your father when he said, "and two"?
I'm going to come closer.
I know your father wanted you to do two.
Am I the...
Did you do two? Did you ever ride a car?
Did I ever ride in cars while I was...
No. Now that the 17 years of being quiet are open.
Oh,
you said
okay.
Your father said that's one.
Yes, that's a good
and
question.
I want to hear the story of that's two. Because I bet you he
did.
said that's two.
I was in... It's a great question because it helped me. I was in Venezuela, and I sailed through the Caribbean, and I got to Venezuela, and I walked to Brazil. And on my way to Brazil, I realized that because I had this epiphany at a prison called El Dorado, that I was imprisoned by my decision to not ride in cars. And I decided that once I got to Brazil, I was going to fly home. It scared the hell out of my dad. And then I would return back to where I had left off and continue walking, which is what that just kind of changed for me, because here I was, I had a PhD, I was a UN Goodwill Ambassador, and I was also an ambassador for Al Gore's program, education program, Global Learning and Observation to benefit the environment. And I felt that I could do more, and I could see that I could do more. I could be here. I wouldn't be here if I... And so I did. I got it, and when I got to Brazil, I took a bus back to the Caracas and got on a plane and flew home and knocked on the door. I told my parents that Fued was coming, so to make sure they were going to be. Fued was a friend from Tunisia who we met and they knew, and they said, "Christmas, Fued's coming? Isn't he a Muslim?" I said, "Yeah, but you know, Fued, he'll show up there." And so I knocked on the door, and my dad looked at me and he goes, "Wow, this is the best Christmas I ever had." And that was two. Now, the really funny part of that is I walk upstairs, my mother said, "Oh, honey, is it Fued? You know that?" And so I walk upstairs, and my mother looks at me and she goes, "Oh, Fued, it's so good to see you." Fued is, maybe 5'7" or something like that. And she says, "It's so good to see you. How are you?" And I go, "I'm fine, And she looks at me some more and she says, "Fued, you look a lot like our son Johnny." "You are our son Johnny." And I thought, wow, I'd do this all over again just for that. Thank you.
So with that, we're going to go ahead and end this talk. There's a class that starts at 1 o'clock, so we want to give them enough time to settle in. But thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you very much.